Oliver Hill was born on May 1st, 1907 in Richmond, Virginia. He was born Oliver White. His father, William Henry White, was an alcoholic. He left Oliver and his mother when Oliver was less than 1 year old. When his mother married Joseph C. Hill, Oliver took his last name and became Oliver Hill. One of his first jobs was working on an ice truck. He was paid $9 a week, and the white boys were paid $12.
I remember coming back up to our neighborhood, and a bunch of boys don't think, I'm bragging, I got a job, I'm gonna pay me $36 a month. After working for a while, I found that the white boys on the truck were getting $12 a week, while I was just getting $9. So it made me a little unhappy, but I didn't worry too much about it.
Oliver Hill moved with his mother and stepfather to Roanoke, Virginia, where his stepfather ran a pool hall. When Virginia made drinking illegal, the pool hall was closed. Oliver Hill claimed that he might have become a pool shark if that hadn't happened. In Roanoke, there was no high school for colored children, as they were called in those days, so Oliver Hill left Roanoke to attend Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. He went on to Howard University, where he got his bachelor and law degrees. He also picked up the nickname Peanuts because he loved to eat them.
I had a propensity for eating peanut cookies. And they said, oh, hey, you always eating peanut cookies. I'm going to call you Peanuts. I still share peanuts with my squirrels.
His class of 1933 was the first one to attend law school in the daytime. Until then, they worked during the daytime and attended school at night. Mr. Hill worked about 30 jobs to earn his way through school.
I learned early on to wait table. That was the easiest thing to do. And then also, from time to time, I drove taxi cab.
One of Oliver Hill's uncles was a lawyer. When he died, he gave his law books to Hill. As a result of reading them and studying the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, he decided to become a lawyer and fight segregation.
In those days, a big issue among so far as Negroes was concerned was trying to get a law through Congress to make it unlawful to lynch a Negro. Getting something done through the political process was obviously out of the question. The only thing that seemed feasible to me was to go back to the Supreme Court and try to convince them that they were wrong in 1896. That was my motivation.
The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th gave equal rights and protection to all citizens. And the 15th gave all citizens the right to vote. Hill's first desegregation case confronted lower pay for Negro school teachers. In 1940, even the highest paid Negro teacher made less than the lowest paid white teacher. He took the case to court and won equal pay for Negro teachers.
I think they were masterful teachers, really. In my opinion, they were superior teachers because they had nothing to work with as compared to what was in white schools. But yet they would turn out scholars. When they began their professions, they were real competitors.
Then my first contact with hearing Oliver speak, when he came to Norfolk, Virginia, during the time they had a suit for equalization of teacher's salary. Just so happens that one of my teachers, one by the name of Aline Black, was a plaintiff in the case. And of course they won that case to equalize teachers' salaries. And because of seeing Oliver Hill, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer too.
When he equalized the teachers' salaries, the dollar value of that was astronomical because they began to earn huge salaries, huge amounts of money beyond what they had earned previously. And I understand that Oliver received very little compensation for that, never really sought it.
His most famous case was Davis versus Prince Edward County School Board. Barbara Johns, a high school student from Moton High School in Prince Edward County, called Mr. Hill's office to ask him to attend the students' demonstration. They were protesting the tar paper shack that they had for a school. Mr. Hill and his partners were so impressed by the students' circumstances that they decided to take the case. It was later combined with the case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. This landmark case challenged racial segregation in schools. A partner on this case was Thurgood Marshall, who was a classmate of Oliver Hill at Howard University. Marshall later became the first black to sit on the United States Supreme Court. On March 17, 1954, Oliver Hill was riding in his car when he heard the news. Chief Justice Earl Warren of the United States Supreme Court read the following quote: "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. The Supreme Court had unanimously ruled that segregation was unconstitutional."
I had just left the office and was coming downtown, so I whirled the car around and flew back to the office and ran up the steps and said, "Get on the radio, the announcing the decision." Yeah, we celebrated the rest of the day.
Because I was washing dishes earning 75 cents an hour, and I was a college student. The white high school students were scooping ice cream in front, making $1.50 and $1.75 an hour. I was listening to a little radio in the back, and I heard the radio announcer say, "Today the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public education is unconstitutional." And the high school students were listening to the same radio out front. And at that point, a chill sort of went through me, and I said, something is going to be changed now because of this. And when I took the next tray of glasses out the front, the boys looked at me in a strange sort of way. And things were never the same after that.
Emancipation too, that's what I called it at that time. Because the shackles, the mental shackles had been unlocked, whereas the Emancipation Proclamation won, freed the slaves, but their minds were still in slavery.
As a result, Prince Edward County closed its schools from 1959 to 1964.
The schools closed in 1959, and Oliver was there as an attorney, he and Sam Tucker, representing, trying to get the schools back open. My parents were devastated as we were, and they sent us first to Maryland, and we were denied there because we were not residents of the city of Baltimore, and we went to Chester, Pennsylvania. So we were without school the first year. The second year, the Friends Association sent me to Berea, Kentucky, and that's where I finished school there. You know, I was leaving my family, all my friends. I realized that I would not be in the graduating class that I had basically started out from early elementary to middle school. And I was going off to a strange place where I didn't know anybody. And I would have to complete my education there.
When we first moved to Richmond, when Dad was elected governor in January of 1970, and the school system was still open, free choice, everybody got to go to whatever school they wanted, which meant the whites went to the white schools and blacks went to the black schools. 6 months after we got here, Judge Marriage issued the busing order, which was following up on the cases that Oliver Hill had done such pioneering work on. Almost the entire white community deserted the public schools at that point, at the busing order point, the city public schools. And we made the decision to stay with the public schools, and my brother and I were bused to Mosby Middle School in the East End, which was actually much closer to us than the school we had been going to previously across town. And to be all of a sudden at Mosby, where not only was it 98% African American, but a much broader economic mix than I'd ever been exposed to. It was a real eye-opener. That was clearly the right choice because it was such an important part of our moral education to know that sometimes you do what's right, whether or not it's convenient. And that's certainly one of the lessons that Oliver Hill's life teaches.
Although the decision on Davis versus Prince Edward County School Board was Oliver Hill's most publicized case, his career included many other desegregation victories. For 20 years, Hill was the director of the Virginia chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He and his team of 13 lawyers filed more civil rights cases than any other southern state. At one time, they had 75 cases in court, and they never lost one. Some of these cases included desegregation of buses and trains, equal pay for black teachers, inclusion of black children in the free school bus program, black citizens' right to serve on juries, and the desegregation of public assembly and recreation facilities. The Washington Post credited Hill as being responsible for winning more than $50 million in higher pay, new buses, and better schools for teachers and students.
We had a case that was suing the University of Virginia to get a Howard Law graduate into the graduate law school at the University of Virginia. When the case was argued, and the three judges finally decided that University of Virginia had to let down the bars to permit blacks to come in. We were standing next to a group of about 4 whites, and a white girl asked the question, if their schools are so inferior to our schools, why is it they win all their cases? And I think that it was a joke at the time, but that was based on the tremendous number of cases that Oliver Hill had won.
And at the time I was a first-year student at UVA, I mentioned to some of my suite mates that my sister had just graduated from UVA. And of course, another student asked me, well, did your parents go to UVA? And I said, no, they went to Virginia State. And I think even though we were just one generation out of segregation, that people who are my age didn't realize the effect that it had, and that they didn't have the opportunity to attend the University of Virginia.
There was Klan activity in Virginia, a lot of it. You know, Oliver was perhaps public enemy number 1 to the Klan. And on numerous cases, he had crosses burned in his yard. In fact, he and Tucker and I all received telephone threats well into our careers. And we learned from Oliver not to show any fear, exhibit any fear because of that. He always felt that anybody who was going to hurt you wouldn't call you and threaten you and warn you about it. They would quietly do it. So anybody who would threaten you obviously was trying to frighten you, and he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of achieving their goals.
In 1948, Hill was the first black to serve on the Richmond City Council since 1895. The fact that 1/3 of his votes were from white voters was a testament to his diversity and his ability to work with everyone.
I was running for public office, so I campaigned in the white neighborhood. They weren't accustomed to that. That's because I was the first one to do that. I campaigned and asked them for votes, and you know, you'd be surprised at how many people vote for you. You just ask them. It was interesting. There were a heck of a lot of 8-to-1 votes, but I got along very well as a general rule with the. Every now and then I was able to persuade them to my point of view on some controversial issue.
2 years later, he lost his bid for a second term on city council by 44 votes. After that, even the notoriously conservative Richmond Times-Dispatch had to admit that the new council would have been stronger if he had been re-elected. In 1941, a black lawyer went to do research in the Virginia Supreme Court Library. Instead of sitting in a small alcove set aside for black attorneys, he sat in the main reading room. When the librarian asked him to move, he refused. As a result of this incident, Oliver Hill helped found the Old Dominion Bar Association, the oldest black state bar association in America.
There was no place for Negro lawyers to get together and chew the fat and discuss cases and just give each other some support. And if you were by yourself completely all the time, you'd be a little, maybe a little more timid than you would be if you knew you had some association with some other lawyers.
I recall when I was president of the Bar Association, I thought it unfair. We had great influence in the appointment of judges, but the bar was closed to blacks. It was all whites. And I remember going to an Old Dominion bar. First time I realized that there was an Old Dominion bar, to talk to them as to what we could work out, and we did. We worked out a system so that they attended our meetings when they had an election for judges nominating.
In 1981, the Old Dominion Bar Association established a scholarship to honor Mr. Hill. It was created for law students at Howard University, where it's still helping young legal scholars pay their way through school. In the nearly 60 years since Mr. Hill started his career, he has received numerous accolades and recognitions. His law firm of Hill, Tucker & Marsh has produced more than 9 judges. In addition to his work as an attorney, Oliver Hill serves as a mentor to students and young lawyers who will continue the tradition of African American leadership in the legal profession.
When I became a lawyer, I was able to go to him for some guidance, and he supplied me, and then began working together from time to time.
Well, I graduated from the University of Virginia's law school in 1972, but the summer after my first year of law school and the summer after my second year of law school, I worked with the firm, and I worked very closely with Mr. Hill and Mr. Tucker while I was there. And I benefited from Mr. Hill's vast knowledge and his vast experience. And I decided, after working with Hill, Tucker, and Marsh for those 2 summers, that I wanted to be a public servant. I remember writing a brief, and as a law student, I assumed I could impress the lawyers in the firm by writing a very long brief. I knew the limit was 50 pages, so I thought if I wrote one that was 40 or 45 pages that I thought was good, that they would be impressed with my work. Mr. Hill told me that, Margaret, brief means brief.
I was a college student, and the General Assembly was passing legislation to let private funds go into, public funds go into private schools for segregation. And they announced there'd be a public hearing. So I was president of the student government of Virginia Union. So I went down to the public hearing to speak for the student government. And Oliver was one of the speakers. In fact, he's probably the main speaker, speaking for the NAACP State Conference. And when I finished speaking, I was the only non-adult to speak. Oliver came up to me, patted me on the shoulder, and said, "Boy, that was a great talk. What are you going to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to be a lawyer, like you." He said, "Why don't you come and work with me?" His speech was one of the most dramatic things that day I've ever witnessed. I mean, there was a joint session of the General Assembly, House and Senate packed in that House chamber, and he literally shook his fist at those people, and his temper was throbbing the way it does when he gets angry, and he dared them to pass this law. In the memory of a black man in 1955 daring 140 white legislators to do something, it struck terror in my heart. But he said, "If you do, we will beat you." I said, "Oh no." But he subsequently did. As senator last year, they honored Oliver Hill, and I prepared and read the resolution and made a tribute for him. And when I finished, this was in the Senate, the ovation was the longest I've ever seen since I've been over there, a standing ovation by the same legislature who he had challenged back in '55 to pass mass resistance law. They were honoring him for his contributions to civil rights. And of course now the group is male, female, black, white, young and old because of him.
Oliver Hill rose above the early problems in his life to become a successful lawyer and a great man.
I think if I would talk about Oliver Hill to some young attorneys or to some children, I would use him as a role model to make the best that can possibly be made out of very adverse circumstances. He's a man that was bold enough and had enough learning, enough wisdom, and enough meanness to go and try to correct things.
And certainly amongst the judiciary, the ones that I've met, oh, he's greatly admired. And amongst the lawyers, when I was practicing law, you knew if Oliver Hill was on the other side, you were in for a scrap. It would be a clean scrap. But you better be prepared because you knew he was going to be prepared.
I don't think the rest of us come near him at all, including me.
Although he had to struggle to get a good education, Oliver Hill was never bitter. He used the power of knowledge, hard work, and a will to succeed to become a leader in the fight for equal rights.
One of the things that's exciting about Oliver Hill is that he continues to be very lively and part of the public debate. He's got some very interesting views on economic justice and the remaining work to be done in racial and economic inequalities remaining in our society.
The time span that I have seen him go from when I first met him there in Farmville to even now, he's still Oliver Hill and he's still moving throughout the community and doing great things.
In the difficult struggle to desegregate American schools, some may be better known, but none are more respected than Oliver Hill. His tireless efforts on behalf of a small group of diligent Black students changed the educational opportunities for all of us. We'll be forever grateful.
I think what I would remember Oliver for is for his courage, his determination, and his great desire to get the best for his people, Black people.
Mr. Hill is the one person that I've met who I felt had an unselfish, steadfast, and unyielding dedication to human rights. He was committed to increasing the rights of Blacks, but improving the status of all human beings, and I admired that dedication.
Oliver Hill's influence is still felt today. A fourth generation of law students, like myself, has been inspired by his tireless devotion to the betterment of African American citizens. Oliver Hill has truly made Virginia and the United States of America a better place for all of us to live.
And because of his courage, massive resistance was broken, the Brown decision was implemented, people were inspired, like myself, to go into the law, to run for office, and none of us would have been elected to public office were it not for Oliver Hill. I would not have been mayor, I wouldn't have been councilman, in fact I wouldn't have been a lawyer. Governor Wilder wouldn't have been governor, and it changed the complexion of Virginia and America.
Of course, Oliver Hill and Thurgood Marshall were practicing and bringing a lot of cases in various courts, but I think Black attorneys practicing now is much more common, and that we're becoming part of the mainstream.
Try to learn as much as you can about the law, be as knowledgeable as possible. Let your word be your bond, and go ahead and try to do the best you can, and enjoy life too while you're trying to go about it occasionally.